Welcome back to World Class Retrospective, episode number 50. As always, I am your host, Austin Skinner, and on this week, after roughly 2 years of very leisurely rewatching World Class Championship Wrestling's inaugural year on weekly television, I have really come to love the promotion, as you guys know. I went into my reviews nearly blind, only being attracted by a handful of the notable names that spent a cup or two of coffee passing through the promotion. With television episodes fully reviewed for the calendar year, according to what's available, I wanted to put a nice bow on my watch through with you guys. Covered in this piece, some of the most notable feuds, angles, matches, and the promotion's greatest hits and misses of 1982. It's the year-end wrap-up. Stay tuned. That's right, guys. Episode number 50, our second to last video that'll be released here for 2025. Remember, next week, arguably our biggest week ever. We are sitting down with Wild Bill Irwin for a full hour-long interview. It's something you're not going to want to miss. Longtime world-class fans or wrestling fans in general. It's very rare that we get the time to really spend with these guys and talk to them about 40 plus years ago of television. So it was my honor to host Wild Bill Irwin. I really look forward to letting you guys hear what we spoke about. But again, that's coming up next week. This week, episode number 50, we are going through our year in review, 1982. But before we get to any of that, of course, you want the latest on World Class Retrospective? Make sure you are following us over on Twitter/X. We are at World Class Retro. Also here on YouTube, make sure you are subscribed. You don't want to miss any content moving forward, and especially not next week. So make sure you're strapped in, tuned in right here to World Class Retrospective. Now, let's get into some of our introduction for this piece, shall we? We're going to just ease back, take a nice trip down memory lane over the last year of videos, and really reminisce about the best parts of 82, the worst parts of 82, and everything in between. If you missed any episodes in between, or you weren't able to watch maybe some of our live watches of our super shows, this will give you a good whole picture, especially as a rewatch maybe once we are starting our 1983 episodes. And remember, that'll start up in January 2026. So whether you're watching this now or you're watching this in a couple of months, here we go. World Class Championship Wrestling fought to get their footing dialed in correctly for television in 1982. It was a year of growth and foundation building. It took the year to establish their stars, commit to production choices, and ultimately forge a new path forward for the company. I think, on a personal note, one of the things that stands out to me most was just how rapidly things changed from feeling really small time, old wrestling to becoming a more sophisticated television production and program. The first half of the year felt very much like an advertisement maybe for the local show at the Sportatorium, Come On Down. And by the second half of the year, the show became Tune In Next Week right here on television. Recognizing that shift, I feel as though World Class stepped up their game in booking, talent acquisition, and presentation. And I'm sure you guys will agree with me. I mean, you even see it in the interviews and the small footage that I've been able to provide here on World Class Retrospective. You go from the beginning of the year where it's maybe not well lit, there's a lot of audio and visual hiccups, to closing out the year, and it's pretty polished for 1982. I mean, we're talking well before, the first Monday Night Raw, or a decade really before weekly televised wrestling hits mainstream. So, a big round of applause for World Class in 1982, which brings me into our first segment of this recap, if you will. Some of the most notable feuds and the ongoing stories that we saw in 1982. First up, Al Madrill, Wild Bill Irwin, and the battle for the NWA Texas Heavyweight Championship. Wild Bill Irwin and Al Madrill were two of the most consistent workers on the whole roster throughout the year, and I've said that multiple times. They made perfect opponents for one another in battles across the spring and summer months, with 3 matches making Dallas television and plenty more occurring on the Loop in Fort Worth. Wild Bill Irwin won the NWA Texas Heavyweight Championship from Al Madrill early on in the year, leaving Madrill to chase him for most of their feud. The two would refocus once David Von Erich, hint hint, become the title holder and return to the promotion, leaving Irwin to feud with Von Erich and Al Madrill to venture into the tag team scene in World Class. So, yeah, I mean, a big chunk of 82 was spent focused around the NWA Texas Heavyweight Championship. Wild Bill was pretty much Mr. Texas Championship for me in 1982. And then once it gets to David Von Erich returns, obviously Dave becomes that guy. So Al Madrill's in there. He's vying for that belt. He kind of starts off with it. Wild Bill makes a good chunk for like the first 6 months, and then the next 6 months, it's the David Von Erich show. So for Wild Bill, Al Madrill to have that feud, to set up now David returning and putting him in that spot where Wild Bill is a viable champion for him to have to beat and feud with. I credit a lot of that to the Al Madrill Wild Bill Irwin feud. So I really enjoyed that this year, and I hope you guys did as well. 2 unsung heroes of World Class, no doubt about it. That brings me into our next feud. H&H Limited terrorizing the whole Von Erich family this year. The blood feud between Gary Hart and Fritz Von Erich soaked into the very fibers of 1982. Gary Hart and Armand Hussein developed H&H Limited Co., recruiting the likes of King Kong Bundy, Magic Dragon, the Checkmate, the Superfly, all alongside their crown jewel, the Great Kabuki. With this deadly force, Hart and Hussein led their men against all comers, but gave the most headaches to Fritz, Kerry, Kevin, and David Von Erich, the Von Erichs. Kevin and King Kong battled for the WCCW American Heavyweight Championship. Kevin and David battled Kabuki and Dragon for the WCCW All Asian Tag Team Championship. Fritz was able to put Bundy down to win his retirement match in June. And Kerry and Kabuki had some of the most brutal bouts of the year on television. Not to mention, it was Gary Hart who accepted a bounty on Kerry Von Erich and had Kabuki injure the knee of the modern-day Warrior ahead of his match with the Nature Boy Ric Flair. The two groups doing battle really carried the year, in my opinion. Up and down the cards, beginning, middle, and end. What a year for Hart and Hussein, their stable, and the Von Erichs. I mean, going back, guys, thinking back, perhaps the most important feud that we got week to week to week throughout 82 was Gary Hart trying to do whatever he can to give the Von Erichs a headache. Kabuki was our top heel, and he'd be squaring off with Kevin one week, Kerry one week. He'd be misting Fritz. There would be, some sort of Hart and Hussein versus Von Erichs for a big chunk of 1982. So we can't help but to mention that sort of faction warfare. There's a lot of individual feuds in there, but as far as the overarching story goes, it's Hart and Hussein and their men versus the Von Erichs, and that really shaped out our 1982 week to week. Also to mention, speaking of Hart and Hussein, a change of heart. Bugsy McGraw stands with, but more so against, H&H Limited and Company. That's right. Bugsy McGraw is one of the guys that I enjoyed the least in World Class this year, but there's no denying that he was featured heavily throughout. His most notable feud of the year was against stablemates turned enemies, Gary Hart and Arman Hussein of H&H Limited Co. With Bundy getting the bigger paydays in H&H, McGraw got frustrated with the stable and decided to fight against them, much to the delight of the crowds filling the sportatorium every week. Bugsy's change of heart made him an instant fan favorite against the evil King Kong Bundy, his former tag team partner in H&H Limited. By the end of the year, Bugsy found himself tagging up with Al Madril to continue taking the fight to H&H. So yeah, much to my chagrin, Bugsy McGraw was a big part of 1982, and he was really helped drawing in those families into the sportatorium. This is the guy you're putting out there to put on a show, throw pies in people's faces, throw Bill Mercer down a super slide at a water park. He's the guy that's, not necessarily your main event, but he's given your main eventers a hard time throughout the weeks. So Bugsy did play a pretty specific role this year. Starting off heel, not great. Going to babyface, nothing I enjoyed, but definitely a bigger shift in crowd reaction and enjoyment of his work, I think. So shout out to Bugsy for that. He was another one of those feuds where him with and against H&H Limited was a big part of 1982 television. So there you go. That brings us next to the modern-day warrior, Kerry Von Erich, giving NWA World's Heavyweight Champion Nature Boy Ric Flair a run for his money twice. Arguably the biggest talking point for World Class Championship Wrestling in 1982 was the ongoing issue between Kerry Von Erich and Ric Flair. Half of the WCCW Star Wars events were sold with Flair versus Kerry on top. After Kerry was able to defeat Harley Race in June at the WCCW Star Wars Super Bowl of Wrestling, he became the official #1 contender for Flair's title. This would spark the 2 out of 3 Falls match in Reunion Arena for the August Star Wars, and finally the fabled cage match for the Christmas Star Wars Super Show. In between that time, it was Flair who resorted to hiring Gary Hart and the Great Kabuki for a secret hit job that put Kerry on the shelf for a month or two with a right knee injury. For all the trouble Flair went through to keep Kerry away from his championship, and despite being a touring champion, this feud helped define the year's main event scene. Over the course of 1982, Ric Flair made Kerry Von Erich's star shine well beyond downtown Dallas. And that's hard to argue. I mean, without a guy like Ric Flair doing all he can to help push forward the top portion of World Class's cards anytime he was in the town or had a chance to do promos, anytime Ric Flair's around this year in 1982 for World Class, he bettered not only the product, what we're watching, but the stars he was going against. He and Al Madril tore it down on TV. That only elevated Al Madril. And of course with Kerry, with Kevin, with all these different guys that got in there with Flair, whether it was on TV or pre-tape from beforehand or at a super show, Flair really did a lot for World Class in 1982. And that's no dig at Kerry. I mean, Kerry is definitely, without a doubt, our top babyface in 1982. He's the guy carrying the World Class flag to all these big matches. I mean, beating Harley Race in June, that's huge. He's got World Class on his back, and now they're marching towards the World Championship. So, big year for Kerry versus Flair, and definitely as far as match quality goes, those guys were putting on the best matches we were seeing in the year. And, without Kerry versus Flair in 82, I feel like the shows, the super shows, the television, everything would have been a lot less colorful. And, even some of the promos, he and Fritz going back and forth via telecast, satellite, whatever the case was. This was the main feud, the main event feature talking point for World Class in 1982 without a shadow of a doubt, and I enjoyed it. I really did. And speaking of stars, let's talk about the very best and worst of the wrestlers in WCCW for 1982. First guy I wanted to mention, Kevin Von Erich claws his way through the competition. Kevin was a guy to count on in 1982. Serving as the backbone of the Von Erich family was no easy task for their year. Fritz retired, Kerry was out with an injury for a bit and then tied up with Flair, and David had only been in Dallas for the second half of the year, spending the first half in Florida. Kevin led the charge for the Von Erich name, taking on several heavy hitters over the year, including the Great Kabuki, Wild Bill Irwin, King Kong Bundy, and more. He was able to capture both the WCCW American Heavyweight Championship and the WCCW All-Asian Tag Team Championship, of course with David, over the course of this year. There really wasn't a time in 1982 that Kevin Von Erich wasn't busy in and around the top of our cards. Hard to argue again. I mean, Kevin was definitely the workhorse of the family this year, no doubt about it. He's the guy you could count on to go out there with pretty much anybody and tear it down. He's a little wily, and maybe hard to control in the ring sometimes, throwing some squirrely stuff. But all things considered, as a fan and a viewer, you had to be a fan and couldn't help to be a fan of Kevin this year. And he, I think, really provided some of the most consistent, entertaining stuff that we saw this year. So hats off to Kevin Von Erich, no doubt about it, for 1982. Speaking of hats off, Al Madrill, the unsung hero of World Class Championship Wrestling. I know you guys are sick of it because I've said it 1,000,000 times. And poor Al Madrill, man. After talking with Wild Bill, I learned that Al Madrill might be a little bit bitter towards the wrestling career for, getting or not getting certain things and moving higher or lower up the card, whatever the case may be. But it's a real shame because Al Madrill is waiting to be rediscovered. And I think fans would really enjoy him because I really enjoyed him. So let's take a look at Al Madrill a little closer. And what can I say about big Alberto Al Madrill? If there's one guy in my watch through so far that needs to be talked about more as a legend of world class and professional wrestling, it's Al Madrill. Hands down. Madrill kept the middle and upper middle of the cards consistent, competitive, and mostly important, worthy of attention. Being a successful babyface that isn't named Von Erich in the Dallas-Fort Worth territory is no easy feat, and Al Madrill was able to keep well out of the shadows of the Von Erichs in 1982. His work rate was notable, oftentimes busting out high-risk moves or stringing along really creditable strikes that other guys just weren't doing at the time. His experience as a boxer definitely translated well for him, as Al comes off as a tough, brawling badass not to be messed with. He was over like crazy this year and had his hands on and around several titles throughout the year, but was synonymous with the NWA Texas Heavyweight Championship. Madrill chased his biggest rival this year, Wild Bill Irwin, in an effort to regain the title in a series of solid bouts. I can't say enough good about him and implore others to rediscover his work, especially during the first year, 1982, of World Class Championship Wrestling television. So again, shout out to Al Madrill. We love you, Al. And true fans of World Class will know the quality of Al Madrill. So again, thanks to him for making 82 that much more enjoyable. Moving on to our biggest man on the show, King Kong Bundy, becoming the menacing mercenary of World Class Championship Wrestling. Well before his known stint as the walking condominium in the WWF, and before he was even given the name King Kong Bundy, Big Daddy Bundy made his debut for World Class as a trainee of the Von Erich dynasty. Being trained by Fritz and coming up as a friend of the family, Bundy sported long jeans and a full head of hair. Though it wouldn't be long before Gary Hart got his claws in this rookie. Seduced by the wealth and the fame Hart promised him, Bundy became the Von Erich family's worst nightmare. He turned on Fritz and began hurting people for checks signed by H&H Limited. For coming from a nobody to one of the territory's biggest heel acts, Bundy had a hell of a year in 1982. He ushered himself into the WCCW American Heavyweight Championship fold and was handpicked as a retiring Fritz Von Erich's last opponent. So yeah, big credit to Bundy this year, right behind Kabuki, probably as the promotion's biggest heel of the year. To see where he started in 82 versus where he ended up is so drastic. Bundy's career progressed 3 years and 12 months. I mean, he literally went from this guy probably won't be around long to God, world class better hope this guy's around a long time and they better hold on to him as long as they can. Because Bundy's become, like I said, just a credible, fearsome monster heel. And I really hope for world class's sake that we see a lot more of King Kong Bundy in 1983, because I think he's going to be an important guy moving forward, especially the next couple of years. So shout out to Bundy. He really helped flesh out those main event cards this year. And speaking of the main event, I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the mystery of the Orient, the boogeyman, or just simply the great Kabuki, who casted a wide-reaching, sinister mist over world-class championship wrestling in 1982. The first man to ever blow a green mist had the audiences and the wrestlers of world-class championship wrestling in a chokehold in 1982. With Ric Flair being a traveling champion for multiple territories, I'd say without a doubt, the Great Kabuki was the promotion's premier heel this year. Starting off with a bang, Kabuki famously temporarily blinded Fritz Von Erich in his left eye. He completed a hit on Kerry Von Erich, which resulted in a knee injury, thus collecting Ric Flair's bounty. It can't be overstated how important the Great Kabuki was to WCCW in 1982. Anytime he was in the ring, it felt big, it felt important, and it felt like real danger for the guy across from him. Alongside Gary Hart and H&H Limited Co., Kabuki was able to hold the WCCW All-Asian Tag Team Championship with his protege, Magic Dragon, and gave other title holders plenty of headaches in between. Kabuki kept a firm thrust kick into the neck of many of the most important players in world class this year. He's another guy that needs to be recognized far more than he is in professional wrestling history. Before the Great Muta, before Kamala, before the Missing Link, there was only the Great Kabuki. And again, shout out to him, guys. One of my favorite acts to watch on television, alongside with Gary Hart, one of my favorite acts. Whether it was featurettes that were showing him doing like cool karate moves, or a simple promo on TV where he said nothing at all and Gary Hart was doing the talking for him. Kabuki's the man, and his mystique can't be understated. And being a really big Great Muta fan, to kind of see the precursor of that has been really special and something that I've really, really enjoyed. And I'm so thankful for. Because really, without this watch through this year with you guys, I wouldn't really have appreciated Great Kabuki as much as I do now. So, another guy I just can't say enough about, and another guy I really enjoyed watching this year. Bringing me to my next favorite guy, the modern day warrior chasing the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship while waving the WCCW flag high. If there was one star that carried the flag for world-class championship wrestling on his back, it was Kerry Von Erich. He was the embodiment of the fan spirit and was the guy who was set to represent the company for all of the National Wrestling Alliance. Despite being sidelined by the Great Kabuki for a few weeks, Kerry became the #1 contender for Ric Flair's title after being able to defeat Harley Race in Texas Stadium in June. From there, Kerry fought Flair twice and became known to the fans as the uncrowned world's champion. He'd become a hair away from becoming the biggest star in professional wrestling, nearly defeating Ric Flair in a cage on Christmas night this year. His promos were typically a dumpster fire, but his look and the action he brought to the ring carried him well through the year to quickly become the heart and soul of the babyface roster. Again, if there's a main event heel in Kabuki, there is a main event face in Kerry Von Erich, and maybe even beyond that, because he's the guy World Class chooses to represent them when facing Ric Flair, the world champion. So, I have a super bias for Kerry Von Erich. He's my favorite Von Erich. I think he has, the most charisma. He's got the best look. He's easy to feel pain for. You want to cheer for Kerry Von Erich. You want him to do well. You want him to beat Flair. So I think for 82, without a guy like Kerry Von Erich, the sympathy, babyface, it would have been a rough year for the good guys in 1982. I think it would have been a little bit harder to cheer for them. Of course, you have Kevin, and you have a couple of other guys, Al Madril. But without Kerry there, that anchor, that strong baby face that can do it, he just keeps getting screwed. I think that side of the roster would have been much more hollow, and a bigger hole would have been left without Kerry. So hats off to Kerry Von Erich in 1982. And speaking of being a little biased, let's talk about this next guy. Wild Bill Irwin, the cowboy of Duluth, a man you love to hate, runs roughshod on World Class Championship Wrestling this year. Much like Al Madril, not enough people recognize all that Wild Bill Irwin was able to provide and accomplish in WCCW. Most famously known as a silly hockey gimmick in the WWF years from now, Wild Bill was probably doing his best work in Texas at this time. He held a commanding grip over the NWA Texas Heavyweight Championship for the better part of the year, fighting off challengers like David Von Erich, Kevin Von Erich, Al Madril, and more. He would briefly join up with H&H Limited Co., tagging with Bundy and only causing more damage to the ranks of the babyface roster. After escaping from the side of Captain Frank Dusek during the first few months of the year, Wild Bill Irwin more than stood on his own as a major player for the company. And boy, did the fans absolutely hate him for it. Irwin became one of my favorite guys pretty quickly this year, and I'd still argue that he is completely underrated by most fans. Another guy I can't say enough about. Love Wild Bill, love his work. He's a perfect mid-card heel. He's a guy you want booked on your shows. He gets his people over that he's facing. He retains his credibility. Big fan of Wild Bill. And I wouldn't have been if I didn't decide to go back and watch World Class. And that's the nice thing. Listening and going through all these guys, all these top stars, let's say, of 82. It's just so nice to be reintroduced to some of them, but more importantly, introduced to some of them. I knew who the Goon was in WWF. Did I know he was kicking ass in World Class in 1982? No. And for me to be able to be afforded that and experience that chronologically and kind of watch how it went, I feel really lucky. And I hope that you guys have really enjoyed this year, watching and covering it along with me. Wild Bill's one of those guys that I looked forward to seeing every week, and he usually delivered every week. He and Al Madril, two workhorses of these cards. The weeks where you wouldn't see Kerry, you wouldn't see Kevin, you wouldn't see David, you'd see a guy like Wild Bill, and he'd be in there kicking ass. So, shout out to him. And again, everybody I've covered on this list so far. These are the guys, whether they were good guys or bad guys, that made up, the portions to really watch and enjoy for 1982. But with the best covered, I did want to mention some of my least favorite stars on the roster to watch in 1982. I'll try to be as nice and as brief as possible. Of course, as you guys know, first on my list was Captain Frank Dusek. Dusek tended to stink up the sportatorium each time he was out there, regardless of opponent. Despite starting out the year leaning toward a managerial role for Wild Bill Irwin, somehow Captain still found his way in the ring too often. Not so lucky for us. Bugsy McGraw also makes my least favorite list due to his weak work as a heel and his over-the-top silliness as a babyface. I've decided that McGraw was booked to make children laugh and have fun at the wrestling matches for the better half of the year, which made him very hard to watch more often than not for a viewer at home in 2025. Arman Hussein's work in the ring or on the microphone in 1982 was typically a drag. Hart was the one who legitimized H&H Limited Co., leaving Hussein's stuff feeling like the B-team portion of the stable. His matches were plagued with extended sections of stalling, and they typically ended with screwed finishes. So, with those guys out of the way, we'll shift the negativity. Let's talk about some of the best matches of 1982 and go on that trip down memory lane. The following are what I consider to be the top 5 matches of world-class championship wrestling for the calendar year of 1982. For their simplicity, I rated each match this year out of 5 stars. These matches here were amongst the very best I saw from the territory this year. Coming in number 5, David Von Erich versus the Great Kabuki, singles match, WCCW television on 11/27/1982. Of course, we're at the Dallas Sportatorium, and I rated this one 3.5 stars. So back in November, one of David's more featured matches when he first returns, because remember, he doesn't return till, mid to late summer. But this was a big match for Dave, and he and Kabuki tore the house down on television, just shortly after Thanksgiving. So shout out to these guys putting on an awesome TV match that we were able to see. Number 4, the Great Kabuki versus Kevin Von Erich, singles match on WCCW television, airing on May 8th, 1982, in the Dallas Sportatorium, and I also rated this one 3.5 stars. Kevin and Kabuki didn't get to lock horns too many times this year, but when they did, it really made up for the time lost. I remember this match specifically being pretty hard-hitting. These guys were laying their shit in, and they were pulling out some good moves for television. So, yeah, shout out to this one back in May, kind of the beginning portion of our year, the first half at least, putting on an outstanding performance. That brings us to number 3, Kerry Von Erich versus Harley Race, number 1 contender singles match for the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship. That was back on June the 4th for WCCW Star Wars, the Super Bowl of Wrestling. I rated that one in Texas Stadium 3.5 stars. And if you remember, it was quite a hardcore bout. Both men ended up busted open. And for Kerry to get that huge win in front of that crowd on his dad's retirement show, lining up a World's Heavyweight Championship match down the line, big fight feel, big win, and just an overall bump for world-class championship wrestling. So shout out to that match. Number 2, I ranked Ric Flair versus Kerry Von Erich, the 2 out of 3 falls match for the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship on WCCW's Summer Star Wars back in August on the 15th, 1982. Reunion Arena. That one got 4 stars. Much to some people's displeasure, I really enjoyed that one. I thought the lead up was good. Of course, we got silly finishes for most of the 2 of the falls out of 3. But with the falls aside, the action, the crowd response, the lead up, all of that stuff considered, I really enjoyed any time Flair and Kerry were able to link up for one-on-one. And that match was no exception. The Reunion Arena crowd was on fire, and they just made it that much better. So if you haven't seen the 2 out of the 3 falls match in August of 82, seek it out, find it, and watch it. Of course, no surprise, that brings me to the number 1 spot, Ric Flair versus Kerry Von Erich, singles cage match for the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship, Christmas Star Wars, December 25th, 1982, Reunion Arena, Dallas, Texas, 4 stars. This is the infamous cage match that starts the powder keg fire that World Class becomes. And without guys like Kerry Von Erich and Ric Flair to have this match, I don't know if it's as big. I don't know if it means as much. Because don't forget, essentially what this cage match sets up is the Von Erichs versus the Freebirds for the next couple of years. But if it's not Kerry and Flair in there, it doesn't matter. Because the lead up to this main event and how important it was for Kerry to win this match, that's what sets up the blood feud for the years to come. If this match doesn't mean as much, if this match doesn't have Kerry and Flair, given the whole history that they had in 1982, the following year doesn't mean as much. It was a must-win situation for Kerry. Setting up for the Freebirds to interfere and cost him that is really what lit the fire under the Von Erichs, under the fans, and under the promotion. And you gotta credit Kerry and Flair. You have to. For all the success that would follow in the coming years. Of course, the Freebirds are a huge, huge part of that. But without that meaningful match, without the stakes in that match, the interference maybe would have carried them a couple of months, but not the length that it did, and not the significance that it had. So all that considered, I gave this one 4 stars as well. In my opinion, it's a must-watch from 1982. Whether you're a world-class fan or just a classic 80s wrestling fan in general, again, seek out the Kerry Von Erich, Ric Flair matches, both from, the August Star Wars as well as the Christmas Star Wars. That brings me to some of my favorite moments and maybe some of the most important moments of 1982. For this section, I wanted to highlight some of the most iconic moments of world-class championship wrestling in 1982. These, in my mind, transcended the territory at the time and left a larger mark on the wrestling business as a whole this year. First on that list, Fritz Von Erich retires a hero in the middle of Texas Stadium in Irving, Texas, for the June 4th Star Wars Super Bowl of Wrestling show. This show has since become known as the Fritz Von Erich Retirement Show. After this match, a moment in time occurred when Fritz was able to celebrate his final win in the ring with all 5 of his boys by his side. He promised the fans coast to coast that all 5 of his boys would be world champion one day. And it was just a feel-good moment in the stadium, but more so in pro wrestling. This legend, this living legend, Fritz Von Erich, is to retire on his own terms, under his own promotion, alongside his young boys who are following in his footsteps. Kerry's becoming a rising star. Kevin's a guy his promotion can count on. David has returned to the territory as a hometown hero. Mike is starting to dip his toes in pro wrestling. Chris watching alongside, idolizing his brothers. For this family, at this moment in time, 1982, Fritz retiring, it just feels special. and it feels important, and it was important, especially given all the things that happen in the coming years. This was a time where everything was still innocent, idyllic, and, bright. The future was bright for the Von Erichs in 1982. After a lengthy excursion in the Florida Territory, working as a good old boy heel, a spoiled brat, if you will, the Yellow Rose of Texas, David Von Erich returned as a hometown hero just in time to fight alongside his brother Kevin, defeating H&H Limited's Evil Magic Dragon and the Great Kabuki in the middle of Texas Stadium on June 4th. This return and the year itself becomes a jumping off point for David Von Erich. And that's important too, right? Because we know Dave once Kerry is cooled off, Dave kind of jumps ahead of both Kerry and Kevin as the next Von Erich in line to maybe become the world champion. And without 82 and without his return in Texas Stadium, I don't know if we get there. It's very much so a welcome back year for Dave in 82. But by 83, he is well established and he's going to become a major player for the Cards moving forward. So without his nice return here, hometown feel in front of his fans with his brother, I don't know if we get there as quickly. So that's another moment I wanted to kind of highlight. In one of the most shocking moments of the year, Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy turned their backs on the Von Erichs on Christmas night in Reunion Arena. During Kerry Von Erich's cage match with the Nature Boy Ric Flair, Terry Gordy famously smashed the cage door on Kerry's head, eventually leading to the stoppage of the match. This would set the stage for arguably WCCW's hottest feud ever for the coming year. Thus, the Freebirds of Von Erich's issues begin, as the WCCW 6-Man Tag Team Championship is also created. So a lot of factors at once, a lot of moving parts at once here kind of collide, and that's the birth of our universe here. Freebirds Von Erichs, it's been well covered that it's, if not the most successful feud in history, damn near one of them. And without that cage door, without those issues flaring up in this cage match, that stuff doesn't happen. Without that level of care and investment from the fans at this time in that match for these guys, it just doesn't happen as good. So that's another super important match for really the history of pro wrestling. Moments like this, the cage door smash, the door heard around the world. That's what starts the very famous Freebirds Von Erich feud. And I can't wait to cover that with you guys. That brings us to the stats of 1982. Some just kind of random tidbits that I wanted to put together that I found interesting enough to note for the year. So the total number of televised episodes currently available this year was 46. We'll be covering 52 episodes, and that includes our super shows and our special interview. But as far as what was televised, you got 46 episodes of world-class TV in 1982. The total number of missing episodes, according to what's currently available, was 7 that I counted. That being the January 16th, January 23rd, January 30th, February 13th, March 6th, March 27th, and April 10th. According to what I know and what I've been able to find and not find, those are the episodes we're missing, and there were 7 of them. Mostly seeming to take place in Fort Worth. Remember, they didn't always, or very rarely recorded when they were in Fort Worth or away from the Sportatorium. And that's either due to, maybe shortened cards. They didn't have the capabilities as much, out of the Sportatorium. I don't know what it was, but unfortunately, a lot of that Fort Worth footage has been lost to time. Interestingly, the total number of televised matches of what is currently available was 180. Now, to me, I thought that wasn't a lot at all. You get 46 weeks of television and you only get 180 matches out of it. Now, remember, we all agreed that the sweet spot was right around 4 matches per televised show. Sometimes you'd get 2, sometimes you get 3, sometimes you get 5. But I think we fell perfectly at 4. So, total for the year, we saw 180 on television. Total number of dud matches this year, which are rated 0.5 stars out of 5, 61. So out of the 180 that we covered, 61 of them were duds. But that's going to happen, right? It's 1982. It's territory wrestling. So, pretty small pool still in 1982. Not everyone is going to be a 4 and 5 star match. So, not a great statistic, 61 out of 180. But something I thought was important to mention, because hopefully in comparison, say next year, we get half that number of duds. Hopefully our in-ring drastically improves. So I wanted to give us a benchmarker here for 1982, and that's kind of where we landed with that. Total number of Super Show events of what's currently available is 3. Remember, they were dated June the 4th, August 15th, and December 25th. Those being the Super Bowl of Wrestling, Summer Star Wars, and Christmas Star Wars. So in conclusion, maybe this was all a little bit long-winded, but I wanted to capture just about everything someone should know about 1982 in World Class Championship Wrestling. Because, let's face it, before I really did all these, this was something I didn't have. I didn't have a way to, get a spoonful of 82 World Class without having to jump in every week. So if you're someone who doesn't really have the time to sit there and, watch every week, or again, you missed some of the weeks that we did here on World Class Retrospective, this was sort of created to give you that spoonful you needed and itch that scratch. I wanted this to be, again, a benchmarker, post in the sand, if you will. This is where we started. This is where World Class's television run started. Here was the best parts of it. Here was the worst. Here was the stuff you should definitely go and find your way to see. Here's the stuff you could skip. And here's how it all shook out. And that was the whole idea behind this episode and this review. So hopefully I provided you guys with that. I do expect matches, angles, talent, and production to only improve in quality as the years of World Class go on. Yet for a first year, WCCW did get some substantial things accomplished. There was plenty to dig into as the foundation was set for the building blocks to come, eventually turning Dallas into the epicenter of professional wrestling in just a few short years. I've really enjoyed my watch through this year for this territory. I think it'll only sweeten the sauce when some more of those familiar faces that I'm looking forward to seeing do start popping up moving forward. There's nothing quite like context when it comes to watching pro wrestling, in my opinion. So, with the context of 1982, with all we know about the stars, the feuds, the history of World Class, I can't wait for 1983, guys. And I hope you join me. Because if you've made it this far, and you've watched along with me, you've seen those super shows, you watch the interview with Wild Bill Irwin next week, it is only going to sweeten the sauce. I mean, having that context and that knowledge for callbacks that might happen or things that might develop in 83 is only going to make it that much better. So we had to start somewhere, and why not start with 1982, the very first year World Class had dedicated weekly television, and that's exactly what we did. And I really hope you guys enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. This has been a fun hobby for me, if nothing else. And I've said it before, but anytime I get the chance to shine an extra light on 1982 World Class, I'm going to do it. because it needs to be appreciated for what it is. It's a big part of wrestling history, and world class in general, I think, is such a hidden gem. The talent roster is so deep throughout the years. There's awesome little matches and feuds. The featurettes that they're putting on at this time is like no other promotion. Some of the action you're seeing, especially with a little bit of the Mexican influence being so close to the border, is awesome. It's just a special, special time in pro wrestling, and things are really starting to explode for world class right where we're at. So strap in, guys. I can't wait for next year, and I hope you're right alongside me because I really am looking forward to it. So until next week, the big interview with the man, the living legend himself, Wild Bill Irwin. I'll see you guys then.